welcome to all our panelists as well as the audiences. On behalf of Institute of Directors, let me welcome you formally to the panel discussion on diversity and inclusion deficit in the boardroom. So thank you for all of you to joining this panel discussion. And thank you to all my panelists who have given up their valuable time to share their experiences and life journey with all of us. I will start with a very short introduction. Introduction has been given to all our audiences in advance, but still it makes a huge amount of sense to introduce each one of you individually. I do not know how you appear on other people's screen, but I will just go by my screen. So on the top left, I have got Charlotte Weller. Charlotte is a highly experienced FTSE chair and non-executive director, and also Charlotte used to be chairperson for Institute of Directors. So Charlotte, thank you very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Next to Charlotte on my screen is Harriet. Harriet Green is again a very accomplished board member and professional. She was chairman and CEO of IBM in Asia Pacific. And again, Harriet, a very warm welcome to you on a very warm sunny day as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for accepting.
Pleasure.
On my right, on the top, is Pramila Srivastava. Pramila is ex-vice president of strategic transformation from the Coca-Cola company. And again, Pramila, thank you very much for accepting our invite, and thank you for being with us coming from the time zone of North America. So I hope you had a good sleep. On my bottom left, my last panelist is Charu Gorasia. Charu is the Director General Capabilities and Resources at the Home Office. And I'm thankful to Charu to come to a panel discussion on a very relevant topic, but also despite the fact that when you work in the white oil machinery at a very, very senior position, sometimes it really takes a huge amount of effort to agree to come to this kind of panel discussion. So Charu, welcome, and thank you to you from all of Institute of Directors and our audiences today.
Pleased to be here. Thank you, Raj.
Just for some hygiene clarifications, we all know that this is done under Chatham House rules. And of course, the recordings will be put on YouTube, but we will be able to edit the recordings in case we believe there is something we should not get into public domain, but we'll try to keep it as authentic as possible. Today, I will start with some very warm-up kind of questions so that we bring the topic to life. And first of that for me is, what are the 3 points that diversity and inclusion is all about? And I'll start with my panelist, Charu, on that. Charu, what's your view?
Thank you, Raj. Brilliant question in terms of what are the 3 things that diversity and inclusion is about. So for me, diversity and inclusion is about the following 3 things. Firstly, drawing on the talents of the widest possible range of backgrounds to improve organizational performance. Secondly, it's about creating an environment where difference is not just accepted or embraced, but is actually celebrated. And finally, it's about an environment where a diverse group of people can work and flourish together.
Thank you, Charu, for a very succinct reply and a very, very relevant reply as well. Charlotte, what about your 3 points?
There will always be a bit of overlaps. For me, it's easy. It's embracing, including, and celebrating human differences in all its forms.
Thank you, Charlotte. That's the shortest and sharpest answer I was expecting. Wonderful. I have got now Harriet as my panelist responding to the same.
So yes, to try and avoid too much overlap, I rather love the Werner Myers from Netflix quote, who says, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And that because of your age, your sex, your color, your creed, your sexuality, and your physical and cognitive ability, that if you're good, you will get on. I think that those elements are very important to people.
And Pramila, to you next.
Yeah, so again, it's hard to add to all the wonderful thoughts already shared. I see it as a competitive advantage, you know, to get the best of the brightest. reflective of the workforce, of the consumers. It is about performance at the end of the day. And empowerment and trust are the other areas that really come to mind.
Thank you, Pramila. That takes me to the opposite question now. Again, I will start with Charu in the first place. Charu, what are the 3 points that diversity and inclusion is not about?
Thanks, Raj. And I always have an advantage on the warm-up questions going first. Short and sweet this time. What is diversity and inclusion not about? So for me, diversity and inclusion is not about the following 3 words that I'm going to say. Checking off the boxes. So 4 words, but it's not about a tick box exercise.
Thank you. I go in the same order. So Charlotte, what are your views on 3 nots?
Thank you. For me, diversity is not someone else's problem. It's all of ours problem. And that's something some people seem to overlook repeatedly. Diversity also is not nice to have. It's something we have because it is the right thing for business, for the world, for the planet in so many ways. And diversity without inclusion doesn't work because that's an illusion.
Thank you. Harriet.
Yeah, I think diversity is not what a series of reports over the last 2 weeks has revealed in the boardroom, whether it's the Women on Boards report, the Hidden Truth report, many headhunters have brought out report. It's not that under 50% of companies have met the target for 33% of women on boards. It's not more than 50% of FTSE 250 companies have all male executive leadership teams. It's not just 16% have any ethnic diversity on their boards. And it's not that 37% have 1 or no female board members. So there's a lot of knots there that we can work upon, I believe.
Thank you, Harriet. And Pramila, you for 3 knots.
Yeah, and I would say it is not just hitting a number. It's not a metric, and it is not entitlement.
Oh, thank you, Pramila. Thank you so much. I must admit, I have to apologize to my audiences. I forgot to mention to you that initially we had requested all of you to look at the booking side, and the booking side had another panelist, Anuradha Rajdan. That only happened yesterday that we had to take Anuradha out of the panel. And I must say to you, it was not because of anything about her time commitment or commitment to come. It was purely to do with the medical emergency that Anuradha faced. And she is right now based in India. And you know, COVID-19 is really having a difficult time for Indian citizens and residents. So I do apologize, I did not tell you before. You might be expecting her, but on behalf of Anuradha, I would say, sorry, she could not make it. But trust me, it was not because of lack of willingness. It was purely accidental due to personal circumstances. So I do apologize, I should have said that first. But nevertheless, at least now I have said it. So with that sincere apology, I will move to some very interesting topics that we found based on the colleagues that we talked to. And the first one goes basically to start with Charlotte. You know, how did you really overcome diversity and inclusion barriers in your own professional journey? Charlotte, I know you are very passionate about you yourself becoming an example of these things, and really our audience will benefit if you would bring some of your personal experience.
Thank you very much. So I'm a fairly sort of focused person when there's something I want, and that was certainly one help. Indeed, there has been a number of issues. I mean, I spent the first 25 years of my career as an investment banker, and we were effectively 300 people in the room and 2 women. But I didn't really notice. I just went on with business. It's by making sure you do better than others. Unfortunately, that was what the game was all about back in the 80s and 90s, and just push through the setbacks. be tougher than the men in sometimes. Like I had a really bad reputation of having a bit of a potty mouth. I would swear back if someone swore at me, which is not something that's good. But that was what was going on in the dealing room those days. Obviously, that's not what's going on in the boardrooms, which is something completely different. Boardrooms were very different. And when I entered them, after 3-4 years, I was strongly considering just dropping that completely because I felt I could not fit in at all. I'm also autistic and I have managed to fit in throughout the years, but the boardroom was just a completely different ball game. And there were some rules that I just couldn't see and couldn't understand. And that made it very difficult for me. Unfortunately, I got divorced in the middle of it 10 years ago. And some boards were considering that I wouldn't be able to be on boards whilst be a single mom with 3 children. And actually sent me emails to say, oh, we moved the board meetings to 8 o'clock in the morning. Is that a problem for you and your children? And you wonder how many other women would have the same emails and how many men would have an email asking them if they could do the job because of their children. I haven't met a single man who's had that question yet. And it's kind of undermining, right? I'm professional. I've worked already then 30 years. And to have that question sent to me was very undermining. And that was the time where I thought, you know what, this is just so pathetic and so low-level organization in terms of how it works in the boardrooms. I don't want to be part of it. But then I decided, actually, I'm going to stay in. I'm going to be a pain in the neck and then continue pushing on. And the people who want to take it up with me, they will take it up with me face to face. And that has sort of worked. It sort of worked. There's still difficulties, but you've got to take the fight. And some of us just has to do it. And I seem to have been given that baton. What I want to see is more sort of normal women in the boardroom that can be women simply by being women, and not women who has to behave like men and be harder than what we actually want to be, or having to lean in more, all of this stuff. That's not how we create diversity. We create diversity by women being women and men being men, and everybody being who they are. And that's what I'm pushing for and what I would like to see, but we've still got a way to go. So, yeah.
Thank you, Charlotte. Pramila, your views.
Yeah, the few things that I've kind of focused on, upon reflection, are a few things around, continuing to kind of refine my value proposition. Like, what can I bring to the table and bring it day one versus waiting? Because it gives you that ability then to influence it and really drive change. So the value proposition, bringing a hip pocket skill, to the table, I think has been, very important for me. Continuously seeking new experiences and being able to then share in those experiences with other people, I think has been an important aspect. Very important in terms of also having a supportive ecosystem. I really like what Charlotte said, is you got to fight it, and absolutely you can't let go. And if you're especially that person who's a voice for many different people, you've got to bring those voices to the table and not be afraid to do so. At the same time, there have been times when you kind of stumble into a very caustic environment or a non-supportive environment, and you've got to kind of know when to cut bait and say, okay, we've got to move on to do, move out of that culture because it's just not the right place to be. So, I've had a couple of those opportunities as well, where I've chosen to make changes. The other aspect is just around resilience. I think, over the years, when I reflect back, it's just really building that resilience for all the ups and downs that you're going to face. You're going to face them. Just be ready for it, brace it, brace for it. And also develop a bit of a sense of humor around it, because there are many times when you're in a room, you speak English, but you don't really speak the language, whether it's the board language or if it's, whatever language. And I'll just give you one example where I had an incredible mentor, one of my bosses, and I one day sat down at a performance review and I said, you have given me all these opportunities and open these doors for me and help me. I said, can you send me to sports school? Because I come in on Monday morning after a game and there is absolutely no conversation around what is it we're trying to do. It's all superlatives, it's all these different things, and you don't want to act like an idiot, you know, not knowing what's going on. So you kind of say, okay, let me kind of figure this out. So anyways, it was funny though. He actually took me to a Chicago game, Chicago Cubs game, and sat down with a little scorecard and taught me all about baseball and things. So anyways, you know, sometimes you just got to have a little bit of fun with it. But I do think resilience is a really important aspect.
Thank you, Pramila. Charu, your thoughts on this, please.
Thank you, Raj. And wow, what a journey for Charlotte. Charlotte, really well done for sticking it through the tough times and inspiring other women. And Pramila, I completely agree with you on the ecosystem point. Having a professional support network around you is so, so crucial. So for my own personal journey, if I'm being completely candid, I spent about 7 years in private sector and about 17 years in civil service, or in Whitehall as we call it. And I will be honest, I have not really experienced that many hurdles to my progression. In fact, most of my progression has come about because I've had some fantastic mentors, coaches, line managers, people who've identified my own potential and pushed me harder than I was willing to push myself. So one of my own lessons from my journey was, one, don't get comfortable too quickly in a role and stay in that place for too long, especially if you're feeling quite comfortable. You've got to really push the boundaries, is the first thing I would say. The next is sometimes, and I think this is particularly true of women that I've worked with, we can build walls around ourselves and confine ourselves and create artificial boundaries in our heads about how far we can go. And I would say, please, please don't confine yourselves by the walls you build around yourself. And you've really, again, got to push every boundary possible. So when I joined the Home Office 3 years ago, a colleague of mine said, oh, you're the first ethnic minority woman that we have seen in a Director General position. And I thought, you know what, I wasn't consciously pushing that boundary, but now that I've pushed it, I'm really happy to keep going as further and faster as I can. And then the final thing I would say is having a professional qualification really helped me to progress as far as I have, because you can progress easily on merit the more you are professionally qualified. So that's for me. Thanks, Raj.
Thank you, Charu. I would not put you in the spot, but I like the idea of pushing the boundaries. So your next boundary is the maximum boundary for civil service, which is a permanent secretary position. I will not put you in the spot, but we are looking at you pushing that boundary and becoming a role model for people of ethnic background and ethnic diverse background and get to the top seat. But I would not embarrass you anymore on this. This could be challenging, so I will move away from you. But I really like the idea of pushing the boundary. So Harriet, you are my next panelist on the same topic, please.
Well, remind me not to go last very often. It's quite difficult to follow these amazing, kernels of advice. So I'll try and pick things that haven't been said and then reinforce where I really have experienced these myself. So I think it has been important for me to be who I am, not let anyone else define me. And that's much easier to say than do. There are sort of rules and hidden guidelines about how particularly women in business as public company CEOs or on very large global boards should behave. So my first piece of advice is about be very physically and emotionally kind of taking care of yourself. We do well when we're well, and not allow anyone else to, create situations where we can't be physically and mentally well. I think secondly, it's been very important to me working in many different industries, running transformations and particularly through a digital and technology environment is to have the skills that the world needs, not just the technology skills, but also the life skills, the abilities to be collaborative, to network, to show initiative, and to be innovative. I think it's also important, Pramila mentioned this, but I think very early on, before it was popular or a done thing, to have your own brand. It's back to this definition. You should not be defined necessarily by the company that you work for or the person that you work for. You know, building all these experiences into being a sort of big, round, fat, experienced manager who kind of puts up their hand to volunteer and do new things. I have to admit that I learned rather late to stop fighting as hard as I did. I didn't have too many positive male role models growing up, losing a father in my childhood. So I fought a bit longer than in hindsight I should have done. And when I began to seek out men who were already chairs, who were prepared to be my mentors, you know, Sabina Gershon, Roger Carr, Steve Kaufman, you know, really experienced people to coach me that I could learn from a basis of trust. You know, that was really, really important. So the point that Sharumu made about walls, I think you can learn from bad bosses and bad situations. I learned a great deal from some of the challenging situations around the Thomas Cook board. One in particular that I've experienced other very senior women saying is that particularly when doing, you know, big transformations, not to make it look so easy. I think there's something in our DNA that doesn't like to make a huge fuss, that, you know, this is all going, of course, well, being factual and accurate. But sometimes, particularly if we're driving, and people think you're done, it's easier to get, you know, a guy from the industry who's much more manageable in place. So I think for me, the single most important piece is it's not important to be liked. I think it's important to be respected and valued and good at what you do. But if people don't particularly like your style, you know, you shouldn't be changing everything about yourself to fit in with others. It's important to be collaborative and to care, but not to be defined by others.
Thank you, Harriet. And I have taken a note of your, basically your desire. I'll try to rotate as much as I can. So just to let you know, on the next topic, you are second, not the last.
Oh, so, thank you, Raj.
So with that, let me bring the second topic, which I believe is of interest to our colleagues. Pramila, that comes to you to start. Please, could you talk to us about one specific situation where diversity and inclusion really created a challenge in your organization, not in your personal life journey? And once it brought it, you know, how was that challenge overcome? Or maybe it was not overcome at all. I do not have that clarity, but anything around whether it was overcome, and if you overcome, how did the organization overcome it?
Yeah, so we, it's a bit of myself and certainly much more from an organizational standpoint in that, you know, one of the situations that I kind of walked into was a role that I needed to bring some level of transformation, or the space or this platform within the organization really needed to change. What ended up happening was we found that the problem solving around those specific issues were really managed by some people who had been in role for a long period of time, had gotten their accolades, but were very, very comfortable, you know, very, very comfortable in what was being done. And it was really interesting because as I kind of walked into the role, I suddenly started seeing these decks that would be deck number 25, same conversation, same outcome, same next steps, lovely conversation. Deck number 36, same thing. Deck number 65, same thing. And I started saying there's something wrong here. You know, we've got to change this. And, you know, we're having the same conversation. And what I realized is, you know, sometimes when people are really comfortable with what is going on, you don't want to change. You don't want to change. You've got millions of dollars in budgets. You can fly wherever you want. You can have whatever conversations. And, you know, you're not going to transform the organization with that kind of homogeneity and way of working and thinking. And the difficult part is there's tremendous credibility with these individuals who have delivered incredible results, you know, over the years, but times have changed. And so one of the things that we started doing was having more open conversations with our associates and really kind of putting it from a point of view of what are some of the problems we're trying to solve here. And I started meeting actually with a whole set of disparate, you know, diverse associates. And what I found was they kind of had resigned to not being able to have a voice in the conversation or really giving up. You know, they were like, what's the point of bringing an idea to the table, because nothing's going to happen anyways. It's the individuals who are kind of ordained, you know, to be the voice that are going to say whatever they're going to say. And what I realized at that point, and what we organizationally really took on board, was how important it was to break those barriers. You know, even though you have people who are very well situated, have the credibility, to bring the fresh thoughts and ideas from different parts of the organization, and how important a role we play as leaders to bring those voices to the table. And what was really incredible when we started doing that was there was some incredible ideas that one would have never imagined. Like if we really sat down with presentations and boards and discussions, we would have never thought of those solutions. And these individuals, you know, started bringing these ideas to the table, and, you know, we started then giving them some seed funding to test the ideas, or test the prototype. And not only were they able to put it into a pilot facility, they actually went into a huge manufacturing facility and tested those ideas. And within a matter of months, it was implemented. And that was just one of those. There were several things that came behind it. And what it really brought back to me was how important we as leaders need to be coaches. You know, we're really at the end of the day a coach to bring the right people together, to create that environment, because sometimes people do not want to change status quo, and how important it is to completely break that barrier, you know, break that those walls down, and, you know, push those boundaries and bring the right voices to the table. And I have seen that multiple times, and I think, you know, I do believe that this is a journey we just need to continue to be on.
Thank you, Pramila. Harriet, your opinion on this point, please.
Yes, I have a very specific example to share, which I think hopefully makes us all think. So I was very privileged to work inside of a company that for over 100 years been very committed to diversity, inclusion, progression and retention of people because of their age, sex, color, creed, sexuality, and cognitive and physical ability at IBM. And I was running the Asia Pac region, which is a very large region with many, many different countries. And because of the commitment, the policies, the things that I'll talk about a little later when we answer the question, what should businesses do? Across Asia Pac, including countries like India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Korea, we were close to achieving 50% of the executive band and above who were women. And obviously they were women of varying ethnicities too, representing the countries that they ran. And there were really two significant learnings from this that kind of ricocheted through the organization. The first was, if you can see it, you can be it. And that very simple Americanism means that we were able to recruit people who'd reached the furthest level of the glass ceiling inside of their own tech companies, who looked at IBM, saw a female chairman, CEO, head of region, head of Indonesia, head of Malaysia, and said, I want to join this company because I don't have to focus on that. It's clear that if you're good, you'll get on. And that, I think, was very powerful. The second was perhaps a bigger learning for me, and that is what that then did to the rest of the executive leadership. It is very rare in an organization for it to be 50-50, and it required more coaching and mentoring, sensitivity, and a lot of age diversity work with the other 50% who weren't women. So the unintended consequences, which were entirely positive, required some extra support, extra consideration to ensure that no one felt marginalized or pushed aside, and that this march, which of course parity seems like perfect fairness, but doesn't always seem like that on the journey to it. So those are two learnings I would share with the panel and with those leaving us notes and chatting from outside.
Thank you, Harriet. Charu, your views on this point, please.
Thank you, Raj. So I'm going to pick a very different diversity point, which has become a bit of an issue for civil service as a whole in the country. And this is about geodiversity and representing the different places across the country. And one of the things we're doing at the moment in Whitehall is thinking about how do we have the most senior policy-making brains of government working from across the country, particularly from smaller towns and cities, and representing the views of those communities. And to address that challenge, one of the things I'm personally doing within Home Office is working with ministers on thinking about how do we have more of our footprint of senior civil servants spread across the country. So that, for example, Home Office announced a couple of weeks ago that we will be creating a new innovation hub for some of our immigration asylum work in Stoke-on-Trent. It's a much smaller town. People haven't really had a big presence of civil service in those locations. So that's how we're trying to address a very specific organizational challenge for civil service on a very different aspect of diversity.
Thank you. Thank you for a very, I would say, not a cookie cutter, a completely different dimension to diversity and inclusion. So thank you for that. My next panelist on this topic is Charlotte.
Yes, yeah, so I would just quickly talk about an organization that was brought in to help within the last year, which is a large retail organization, and their challenge was that their clients was mainly millennials and younger, but their executives and the people within the boardroom were not. So how could they try to get those younger people more? And that's one of my pets. I have a strong idea that younger people need to come to the table, and we need to step out of the chairs and allow them to make decisions with our good support and experience, right? So I advised them to take under 30-year-old apprentices onto the board from their staff and also from outside, where they could get used to having under 30-year-olds within the boardroom in a safe environment and under legal agreements and everything. And then also use those apprentices to subsequently set up an advisory board of under 30-year-olds so they can get that voice to the table and they can have that input, so their business as a retail business understands how their majority of clients or customers want to receive the goods that they have. this is a big issue around that. I mean, I started Boardroom when I was 42 and I was told I was too young to be there. So I kind of had to say, well, I'm here. So, you know, it's off. I didn't say that. That's it.
Thank you, Charlotte. That brings me to the third point, and I will start with Harriet on this one. This is about, now a little bit of solutioning side. What should the businesses really do to overcome diversity and inclusion deficit in the boardroom? We all know that there is deficit, and I think we should not waste even a single minute debating that. But what should they really do?
Yeah, so I'll try and cover quickly. I mean, this is a multifaceted issue and no one wants to, just soundbite it, but I'll share a few thoughts around kind of what businesses might do. I think there's some things that each of us needs to do. To Charlotte's point earlier, it's not someone else's job, it's kind of all of ours. I'm not going to talk too much about chairs and headhunters, though they have a massive role to play in all of this. But I think from a business perspective, I think every organization that is serious about achieving, their EDI, their ESG metrics, being a place where, an amazing range of people want to come to work and bring 200% of who they are to work, is first of all, having a clear public diversity, inclusion, progression, and retention plan. As you would if it were an environmental plan, a new marketing plan, a new product launch. Who does what by when, and really powerful communication on the successes along the way. Communication, highlighting the stars, and reinforcing this, if you can see it, you can be it. So I think that the whole diversity and inclusion, retention and progression agenda is so much more than HR. It's every manager, it's every individual who's saying, I want my team to be richly diverse. I want to be on the shadow board that we set up in Asia Pac. I want to be mutual mentoring with other individuals to learn from them. There needs to be a groundswell of activism inside of an organization, or at least to achieve good results, it has to start there. I think secondly, for ourselves, all of the amazing women on this panel have talked about their own steely determination to a degree. And I always say, if you want to do this as an individual, if you want to be on a board or you want to become the CEO of a public, private, government, whatever it may be, my first advice is 100% of the shots that you don't take won't go in. So if you want to do this, you maybe need to take a little risk. You need to have the skills that the world needs. I absolutely believe that you need to have, powerful mentors and go out and seek those, and to network and ensure that your own brand, what you say, what you write, what you do, in the pursuit of ensuring that you help women along the way, whether it's 4 million teachers and 1 million young women to learn STEM in India, or in your trustee work on board, so that you are moving us forward in a small and medium and perhaps even large way. I do also think within that, at times we rely way too much on people to give us a buzz. And I thought there was one statistic 2 weeks ago in the raft of information that came out about women on boards, was that none of the headhunters whose statistics were used were prepared to comment in the UK on whether the 158 women who had been placed on boards had replaced other women or were in addition. And so I think that the role of us sometimes, not to circumvent, they have an important role, but go and research the chairman of the top 250 companies in the UK, and you will see there are many who have a track record of embracing age diversity, ethnicity, women on boards. Write to them. It's not always for someone else to do, but businesses at their core, if they want to have an amazing team solutioning through this vortex of change, because it's not just the pandemic. We have climate change, we have deep inclusion and diversity issues, and a massive technology change. So having the skills that the world needs is really important as well. Lots of things in there.
Thank you, Harriet. Charu, what are your views on the same point?
Thank you. So I'm going to build from where Harriet has left. Not say a few things. I was reading a couple of weeks ago about some research that Russell Reynolds had done, looking at the organizations or those boards that had become successful in having a more diverse face of the organization in their boardroom. And the few practical things that I read they were talking about was, firstly, the nominating committees of these organizations are playing a very proactive role in championing underrepresented talent. So that's the first thing they're doing. The second thing that the report was talking about was where board members are actively championing underrepresented talent themselves by either sponsoring or mentoring people. The third thing they're doing is not just looking at traditional places when they're advertising the jobs, but actually casting their net really wide in a different talent pool. So not just traditional places where you would advertise the jobs, use the same language that you've used for years to target your audience, but actually change the way the whole end-to-end process works, from the way you recruit, the way you advertise, the way you select, the way you mentor, coach individuals. And then, as Harriet was saying, having role models, so having more senior role models. And sometimes if your boardroom doesn't have it in the form of an executive, having non-executives who can provide a different face to the organization can also make a significant difference. So let me talk to you a little bit about some practical things we have done within the civil service and Home Office that I'm aware of and that I have seen works. So firstly, we make sure that whenever we are recruiting, particularly for senior positions, we have as diverse a panel as possible. We then don't allow shortlists to proceed to interviews if they're not diverse enough to represent the community that we are serving or the citizens that we serve. The third thing we're doing is, for most senior positions in civil service, so this is director, director general, permanent secretaries, you have an independent civil service commissioner who chairs the panel. So it's not the line manager, so that you take care of any unconscious biases of people trying to recruit in their own image. And the final thing that I would highlight that really does make a difference is a lot of work is done up front, even before the positions become vacant, to identify where is the talent, to put them on various development programs and assign specific sponsors and mentors to these individuals who can coach them to get ready for the board positions. So these are just some practical things that I have seen actually work in those organizations that are addressing the diversity deficit in the boardroom. Thanks, Raj.
Thank you, Charu. That's very recent and very direct. So I'm sure we all will benefit from that. And as you all have said before, it's not about someone else's responsibility. This is about broadening that responsibility itself. But that brings me to Charlotte on the same question. What should the businesses do to overcome this deficit?
So the question is kind of interesting because it can be looked at two different ways, right? It's so what should the businesses do as opposed to what should the boards do? So if the business has a board that is not diverse, what should they do about that? That was kind of why I was looking at it, because that is in fact what often happens. You have a business that has strategically sort of embraced wanting to have diversity, but somehow the board is not watching. They are just staying the same, and it becomes a real issue within the business. So in that case, I feel that the whole strategic part of what comes from the staff and executives up to the board strategically should include the diversity in the boardroom across the entire organization, effectively get the board to approve that as part of the strategic over sort of a larger approval. And obviously by then you've captured them in their own approval, and they have approved that they would be diverse. So if they are then still not diverse, I think the rest of the business needs to apply pressure onto the boardroom and make it very clear that, one, the board members are role models for the entire organization and other stakeholders, but that also they now pose a brand and reputational risk that needs to go into the risk register and be increased up to red if it's, say, an all-white male board, because that is in fact a very high risk for brand and reputation. So through these kind of other business ways, you can put the pressure on so that you end up overcoming the D&I deficit in the boardroom. I mean, it goes without saying, I'm going to say board apprentices again, if they really don't understand what is diversity and feel very uncomfortable with it, put 2 observers in the boardroom, or 1 observer 2 is really good because it brings more diversity into at the same time, and let them get used to it. Some research are suggesting that we are doing at board apprentices that it changes the sort of the feeling of fear from board members. I mean, it's like xenophobia. I mean, they just must suffer from xenophobia. It's like, no, we must have people the same as us. So to take that fear down a bit, get them to have some field training by having observers in a boardroom of very different people to themselves. So those are so that's the angle I sort of looked at it from.
So Pramila, you have the final word on this one.
Yeah, so just a couple of points. Yeah, you know, I think one of the things is, you know, the aspect of pressure, I think, is important, because when you're seeing a board, or when you're seeing an organization that hasn't made the kind of inroads from a D&I standpoint, having a representation of the demographics or the consumers or the customers that you're serving and working is so critical to trust. Because you're not going to believe that people understand where you're coming from or what your challenges are if you don't have something that's representative. So when you're not seeing that traction, I think putting that pressure, having those direct, honest conversations when you have a seat at the table, I think is really critical. The second area is rest around potential and looking at people in the organization as we're looking at filling the pipeline, you know, in terms of potential and agility, that we recognize who those people are and really try to bring those people, you know, give them access to opportunities. I think that that's something that, you know, Charu mentioned some of the very practical things that are being done. I think we just need to continue doing more of that. And lastly, I would say it's really important to continue to push ourselves to keep looking at our culture to see if there's unconscious bias, if some things are just not happening, if you're seeing certain patterns, to really lean into those and start addressing, you know, some of those opportunities, because we've got to make ourselves uncomfortable when we're not seeing the kind of progress that we, you know, we want to see in the world, in our organizations.
Thank you, Pramila. That nicely segues into my next topic. And I am going to Charlotte as my first panelist to start that conversation. And this is around, we talked about the business. What should a leader do? Because we are, you know, we would have at least today 60, 65 leaders in this room today, virtually. And, you know, what should these leaders do to significantly increase, you know, and bridge this gap of D&I deficit? Personally, what a leader should do, Charlotte?
So if you're a leader, you'll push for the right thing, right? you will not be passive aggressive and just not make it happen. Leaders need to champion and push what is best for the business and what is best for the broader society. This is not about, I can see there's a comment around, should good people be fired because they're not themselves diverse? That's not at all what we're talking about. We're talking about a balance. We're talking about aiming for a balance where we have proper representation in the boardroom, we have proper cognitive diversity. I mean, when I talk about diversity, I talk about gender, ethnic, generational, neurodiverse, disabilities, LGBTs. All of us have all very different experiences and within our life, and within each group of diverse people, we have top talent, right? And if we think that we want to exclude a group, we lose out on top talents. And that's really the thing. No, there's good people, right? But if you choose everyone in the same group, you go down the talent ladder, right? And so you take one down here when you could go to another group and take one here. That's stupid. So you've got to go in and seek the top talent, and the top talent is across the society as a sort of vertical cut of society. You have talent in all the different, I mean, people think autistic people are only entry level. Well, actually, we're also in boardrooms, and just because we're autistic doesn't mean we shouldn't be there. Disabled people, if someone is in a wheelchair, doesn't mean they haven't got amazing talent. I mean, look at Stephen Hawking, right? So I think we just need to open our minds and not be satisfied going down the talent curve to stay in having just one group of people there. So it's not about, it's about attracting the best talent and getting the best minds to the issues at hand.
Thank you, Charlotte. And that brings me to one recognition, because some of our colleagues did raise that, why don't you have full representation? So all that I can say on the context of this is, you have to start a panel discussion somewhere, but that's not the end. I only hope that this is the first panel discussion on this topic. And in the next panel discussion, we'll bring different dimensions into the play. So I really like Charlotte, you touching upon the wider topic of D&I dimensions, not 2 or 3 dimensions alone. But that brings me again to a very contrasting world of Charu in civil service. So Charu, what should the leaders do in civil services or even in other sectors? Because you did work in private sector as well. What should a general leader do to bridge this gap?
Thank you, Raj. I agree with everything Charlotte just said. For me, it doesn't matter whether you're working in the private sector, in government, in charity. The role of the leader, in my mind, is to create the right conditions where everybody can realize their potential and be their best selves. So they can be themselves, and when they can be themselves, that's when you will be your best self. So you can't have a personality where you stop being yourself as you enter the workplace and you drop your, your authentic self at the door and become a corporate self as you walk through the door. So for me, leadership, whichever organization you're in, the job of a leader is to create the conditions and the environment where everybody can be themselves and they can be the best version of themselves, so that they realize their full potential, whatever they're trying to do, whatever their background. And for me, diversity goes even beyond some of the characteristics Charlotte was referring to. The other one that I'm quite interested in is socio-economic diversity. So, you know, how people are moving in terms of social mobility from very different backgrounds and coming to the fore, particularly in civil service. Years ago, one of the stereotype was you had to be Oxford or Cambridge to flourish in the organization. And we're leading the path to show that is absolutely not true. You don't have to be from Oxford and Cambridge to flourish. You can come from whatever background, be yourself and be your best self at work.
Thank you for very inspiring words, Charu. My next panelist on this is Harriet. Harriet, your views on this one.
Thank you, Raj. And again, I'll try not to duplicate everything that's been said. Is if we stopped here, just, powerful enough. But I think that leaders inevitably have to be the catalyst for change, particularly when the world is coming through an extraordinary a vortex. And I think that leaders also need to win for their companies, for their boards, the war for talent. And it is a very real war at this time. That's already been described. I think that the leaders that I have seen do the best job at this do a number of things. First of all, they demonstrate an energy and a passion for diversity and inclusion, and then they can express very clearly what that means to them. As I said earlier, for me, it's about everyone, because of their age, their sex, their color, their creed, their physical and cognitive capabilities, can get on. And so the leaders that I've seen do really well have three things. They first of all have a sort of a psychology that they emit to the organization to capture hearts and minds about why this is factually important, why it makes sense, what the data is, why it's right for society, why it gives particularly our Generation Zers and millennials a great sense of purpose. Secondly, they do the physiology. That's the nerve endings, the blood flows, the systems and the processes, that you can't just hire your buddies, that there is a clear process, a diverse slate, a great deal of thought into, as we had across Asia Pac, how people from different neuro backgrounds can contribute extraordinarily to different parts of the tech sector. And then thirdly, that most leaders own the anatomy, the structure, the skeleton. When you've got the psychology and the physiology, then how you structure your teams, your organization, even the things that you've been advised on, how you can give input to restructuring the board, lies with those leaders. And I also deeply agree with the point, I've been working the last sort of 8 months on a program, Mission Beyond, and a platform totally around social mobility for young people ages, when they finish school into work, because the statistics are horrifying, that many, many great corporations would love to have a more diverse from a socioeconomic background, but the majority of those they hire onto apprenticeship schemes in as young workers not only come from the same 8 universities, but basically are white Aryan males. So I think that for me, it's passion, a communicated psychology, physiology, and anatomy that embraces having the very best people and then progressing them through the organization, because they can bring 200% of themselves to work, and retaining them. Some corporations have been good at hiring, but that's not enough. That's just a very short-lived numbers game if you don't do the other parts right.
Thank you, Harriet. Pramila, you have the last word on this again, but that doesn't mean you have to be short, just to be clear.
I agree with all the different perspectives that each of, Charlotte, Harriet, and Charu have brought. I truly believe there's a lot of potential still out there that we haven't even reached. And I think there's a huge opportunity to look for talent in different places and then to meet talent halfway in terms of what are their barriers, what are their challenges, to keep them, because I think there's a lot of attrition in the pipeline where we're losing people with tremendous potential along the way. And sometimes it's a question of flexibility, sometimes it's a question of accessibility, but really, building that pipeline and spreading our net wider and meeting people to kind of understand what those challenges are to keep people in the workforce. I think that that's a really critical area. The second area is around valuing diversity. Many times you see diversity or an alternative point of view being, being accepted, but really valuing that, I think, sets up a great role model for others to kind of follow. And lastly, I would say when we do bring someone or hire a diverse talent into, whether it's the boardroom or in a leadership position, to make sure that we let them be themselves and let them bring their whole selves to work. Because if we expect them to comply, to be a certain way, dress a certain way, think a certain way, say certain things, you know, be certain things, we're losing why we brought them there in the first place. So really to provide that ecosystem and value what the diverse candidate or person brings in to the table. And unfortunately, there's still a little tokenism in that you may have one person or two people. I'd like us to get bolder in our vision as leaders to bring in more representation and to keep those people and nurture them and bring them into, you know, and make sure that we can sustain their performance as well, as much as, of course, there's personal accountability, you know, to drive your own results.
Pramila, thank you very much for summarizing it so well. And I must say, I like this, and I'll quote you somewhere. I like the idea of not aiming for acceptance. That's a very low bar. You know, 20 years back, if someone was saying that I will accept diversity and inclusion in my organization, maybe it was not a bad challenge. But today, if someone says we accept diversity, that means the bar is very, very low. So I really love your challenge that acceptance is no good at all. Don't even think about it. Go much, much beyond value. And the originality point has come across very well from most of you. And you know, I think it's a fact all our colleagues in the call, although they can't talk, will agree that people perform the best when they are in their original shape, in their original setting. And as a leader, it's our job to give them that original setting. Because you do not take the natural habitat of a lion. You do not take a natural habitat of an animal. You don't take that from a fish out of water. Why would you do to a human being in the society? So I think that's a very passionate common theme, which I summarized, which came from all the panel. But that brings me to the inspirational part of our panel discussion, which this time goes to Charu for a change. Because Charu did not open any discussion. But Charu, I will start with you. But on this one, my request to the panel is, what are the messages you want to give to the current and future leaders on diversity and inclusion? I hope there are some students, and if they are not, I believe they will listen to this recording at some point of time. So yeah, give us that inspirational call to action, and not only for the leaders, but also for the people who are just stepping into the career or professional ladder, or maybe just educating themselves.
Thank you, Raj, and thank you for giving me this platform and opportunity to inspire some future leaders. So firstly, I'd like to say that I feel the pandemic in some ways has hit every country, and generally you don't see people unite in grief the way we have all united because of COVID. So in some ways, it creates a completely new opportunity and a completely new burning platform to think about diversity and inclusion in the future in a very, very different way. The whole adopting of digital ways of working, the fact we're doing this panel virtually like this and reaching out to so many people, the fact you're going to record this and put it on YouTube so that people can watch it later and access it in their own time when they want to access it in the way they want to access it. All of these really, really creates a fantastic opportunity to get rid of the traditional barriers to diversity and inclusion that we have all faced in our organizations. So my message to all our current and future leaders is exactly as Pramila and Raj was saying a bit earlier, don't just accept diversity, don't just embrace it, but please celebrate diversity and inclusion. And one of the ways in which we can all play a part is please go and join organizations, because only when you're inside an organization can you actually really personally make a difference. So not just expecting somebody else to go and sort these issues out, but do it yourselves and do it ourselves. And I'm also going to shamelessly use this time and opportunity to make a plug to inspire our future leaders to come and join the civil service. because I feel personally, this is my own experience of civil service, that civil service offers an unparalleled breadth of opportunities that's not even comparable to any one organization that can offer you on development of your career. You can, relative to some of the private sector organizations I've worked in, I feel the level of responsibility our frontline people get day in and day out, and middle managers take significantly complex management judgments every day. This means that there's more opportunity to learn a lot faster than you would learn anywhere else in other organizations. And I don't think I have seen the sort of commitment I've seen to diversity, inclusion, equality, and fairness anywhere else that I have seen in civil service. And finally, I'd like to say, if you really want to positively make a difference to people's lives, there is no better way to do it than to serve a government organization that touches millions of citizens' lives nationally and internationally. So please, please go and join different organizations. Don't just sit on the sidelines and comment on deficit in the boardroom, but get involved, get stuck in, and take personal responsibility to make a difference, to bring in talent. So I was going to end there, Raj, and hand over to some of my other panelists now.
No, thank you, Char. Very, very nice for you. Very passionate appeal. I'm sure people are going to take note of that. And I must say, I've worked with governments for some time now. And the best thing about the government is that if you do good work in government, you get very well recognized. People just do not think that you did it because you are paid to do it. So passion for supporting individuals, passion for recognizing people, and recognizing people in a very, very holistic way. I will put my endorsement to the civil service. So you have my take in the box, although I can't apply for many jobs. I'm not qualified well enough, but I'm sure some of the colleagues will take that plunge. So on that happy note, I have to go to Harriet now, again on the same side. What messages, what learnings, what is the call to action to our leadership fraternity as well as the budding leaders?
Well, I think our people on the call and those who watch it will be overwhelmed with advice, but I would say pretty much everything starts with you. So as I said earlier, ensuring that your physical and emotional well-being are strong, because this is where your resilience to both differentiate, learn the skills that the world needs, and to be the change that you want to see in the world, it kind of starts with you. And then I also said, and I believe this passionately, 100% of those shots, whether it's applying for a new job after today or whatever it may be, 100% of the shots you do not take, they won't go in. So a little bit more personal boldness. I also concur. I think it's very important for us as women who are privileged to have had some of these opportunities to be very active allies, mentors, advocates, to really, be, really powerfully involved. I love what Pamela Fuller, the author of The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias, says, words matter, and what's appropriate and inclusive evolves and changes over time. It is essential for all of us to listen, watch, learn, engage, and re-engage. And as we're on a merciless set of plugs here, the charity Mission Beyond that we've started and its Open Doors platform that encourages young people who aren't yet sure what their amazing skills are, right the way through to the corporates who have jobs, who really want to embrace a different socio-economic cohort. We'll be launching that shortly, and I think that will help too. So hopefully all of those bits of advice are embraceable and will make you feel positive and infused, as well as move you forward.
Charlotte, takeaway for all of us from your side.
Thank you very much. It is a bit of a repetition for me. It's lead the way professionally and privately. I'm a big believer in servant leadership, that when you serve other people to lead as well and help them, lift them to be successful, you have a greater impact in society. See differences as an opportunity to grow. And this has been touched on before, it's not a threat, it's a real opportunity to grow. When you surround yourself with people who agree with you and who are the same as you, you don't grow, you don't give yourself that opportunity to grow. Be aware that there is a big neutral middle team. In any team, you have this group in the middle that's sort of neutral, that can be swayed anyway. That goes for the population, for politicians as well. If you are one of those neutral middle people, try to make a stance, try to actually bring that group over to the side of moving forward, right? And speak up, because when you don't speak up, you become part of. So speaking up is really important. For me, Martin Luther King is someone I often quote, and one of his quotes was, I don't remember the words of my enemies, but I do remember the silence of my friends. Don't be that silence.
Oh, what a lovely thought, Charlotte. Thank you so much. And that brings me to Pramila, you for the inspiration to our panel, as well as the other colleagues who are on the call.
Wow, that's a big one.
Yes, you have the last word. You have the last word.
Oh my. So my call would be to be bold and transformational. I mean, it is incredible what has happened with COVID. If there's any silver lining, we have changed the way we work. We have changed so much from a personal side, you know, in terms of the corporate side and the work side, and everything's merged together. There are cats on TV screens, there are dogs barking, there are kids, all these things that you had to kind of leave aside. And the reality of it is we are efficient, we can get it done. And it really doesn't matter where you are, you know, in the organization, where you are in the world. I think technology has just transformed something that we could have never imagined in terms of, you know, how we're working. So I will really challenge us not to go back once we start going back into the office to the old ways of doing things, but to really challenge ourselves in terms of preparing ourselves for the future, but also dreaming, reinventing, reimagining. I truly believe this is such a transformational moment for all of us, both personally and within our organizations, and really for the world in terms of how we what we look like, you know, in the future. So there's no time like now, and I'm really excited about all the opportunities we have ahead.
Thank you, Pramila. That brings a memory in my mind. Actually, in April, we had Sir John Kay. At that time, he was Professor John Kay, but in the Queen's birthday honors, now he is knighted. So Sir John Kay on that day said that the biggest gift of pandemic to the humans, basically society, is that we all have gone beyond individualism. Because earlier we thought that greed is great. Now people are really thinking that greed is dead. So on that note, which is not my original quote, it is a quote from Sir John Kay. I really believe that, you know, how do we put at rest the good things that have come out of all these debates and make them as a part of the new normal, and then push it the way, you know, you all said earlier, don't accept value. So I think that brings us nicely to a reasonable closure. I know this is a very hot topic, it can go on for a long time, but also I want to let our audience know that this is not the end of the debate. I hope Institute of Directors and my other colleagues would carry this debate forward till such time value becomes the common minimum barrier, and then we set another target, which is much bigger than even valuing diversity and inclusion. So that's my goal, which I'm setting up for my other colleagues. But with that, first of all, I would like to thank our lovely audience. They have given up their serious time in the middle of an afternoon, on the middle of a working week. So on behalf of the panel Institute of Directors, thank you to a very patient and very, I would say, a wide range of people who have attended this. On behalf of Institute of Directors and also our audiences, I have two hats. I would like to really pay our sincere gratitude to Charlotte, Harriet, Pramila, and Charu. And I really hope that you had a bit of enjoyment too, not only us. But in the last, I have to do something which I have to do. I would say that all of us play a very, very easy part on these debates and discussions. The people who make this happen are very different people, and people do not notice them. And to that service, I would like to thank Julie, Juliet, Tanya, and a number of people in IoD who have worked behind the scenes and make this happen. And also some of your team members who have worked with me to make sure that we are fully on board with what we are going to do in this panel discussion. So with that last thank you, I think I would take your permission to close this panel discussion. And for a change, I'm bang on time. Just to let you know that the next panel discussion is there, but there's a separate link for it. So for the colleagues who are joining the next panel discussion, the link will be separate. You'll have to come out of it. And that is around shortage of digital transformation, a deficit of digital transformation in the boardroom. So deficit is the theme this week. But to my panelists, again, thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you very, very soon.